The President of the Republic of Finland is the nation's head of state. Under the Finnish constitution, executive power is vested in the President and the government, with the President possessing only residual powers. The President is elected directly by the people of Finland for a term of 6 years. Since 1991, no president may be elected for more than 2 consecutive terms. The President must be a native-born Finnish citizen. The office was established by the Constitution Act of 1919. The current office holder is Sauli Niinisto. Officially, the head of state is known as the President of the Republic of Finland, or, more often, the President of the Republic. This is in contrast to the former presidents who retain the title President. In other contexts, the generic term for president is puheenjohtaja, except for appeals courts and Supreme Courts where the term presidentti is used. Election. Candidates for president can be nominated by registered parties which have received at least 1 seat in the preceding parliamentary election. A candidate may also be nominated by 20,000 enfranchised citizens. Between 1919 and 1988, the president was elected indirectly by an electoral college made up of electors chosen by voters in the presidential election. In the 1988 presidential election, a direct and an indirect election were conducted in parallel. If no candidate could gain a majority, the president was elected by an electoral college formed in the same elections. Since 1994, the president has been elected by a direct popular vote. If only one candidate is nominated, he or she becomes president without an election. Otherwise, the first round of balloting takes place on the 3rd Sunday of January in the election year. The elections are 2-staged. If one of the candidates receives more than half of the votes cast, he or she is elected president. If no candidate wins a majority in the first stage, the top 2 candidates rerun in the second stage 3 weeks later. The candidate who then receives more votes is elected. In the event of a tie, the election is resolved by lot. The Council of State confirms the outcome of the election and, if necessary, conducts the drawing of lots. The president assumes office on the first day of the month following the election. There have been several exceptional presidential elections. The first president, Carlo Juho Stalberg, was chosen by the Finnish parliament due to the transition rule of the constitution and also due to the martial law. In 1940 and 1943, the 1937 Electoral College chose the president, as it was felt that a popular election could not be arranged due to the martial law and the continuation war. In 1944, special legislation directly stipulated that Marshal Mannerheim be elected president for 6 years after Risto Ryti had resigned mid-term. In 1946, special legislation empowered the parliament to choose a successor for the remainder of Mannerheim's term, the latter having resigned. Parliament then chose Prime Minister Juho Kusti Paasikivi as president. In 1973, special legislation extended President Urho Kekkonen's term by 4 years until 1978, when he was re-elected regularly. Inauguration. The president-elect, accompanied by the Speaker of the Parliament and the outgoing president, assumes office on the first day of the month following the election by making a solemn affirmation in both Finnish and Swedish at a ceremony in Parliament House. The affirmation is specified in Section 56 of the Constitution, in Finnish minä en jonka imin kansa on valinnut imin tasavallan presidenteksi vakuutan, että minä presidentua mesaani vilpittömästi ja uskolisesti noudatin tasavallan valtiosääntöä ja lakia sekä kaiken voiman edistää imin kansan menestystä. In Swedish jagen, som av Finlands folk har valt till president för Republiken Finland, försäkrar att utövningen av presidentämbetet redligt skall följa republikens konstitution och lagar samt efter allmän förmåga, främja det finska folkets välfärd. In English, whom the people of Finland have elected President of the Republic of Finland, affirmed that in the execution of my office as President I shall sincerely and faithfully observe the Constitution and laws of the Republic and to the best of my ability promote the welfare of the Finnish people. The term of the president-elect begins and that of the predecessor ends at the moment the solemn affirmation has been made. After the inauguration, the new president, accompanied by his or her predecessor, inspects the guard of honor outside Parliament House. Duties and powers. The President's functions and powers are directly defined in the Constitution. In addition to those specified there, the President also discharges functions assigned to him or her in other laws. Under the Constitution of Finland, executive power is vested in the President and the Council of State, which must enjoy the confidence of Parliament. This principle is reflected in other provisions of the Constitution concerning the President's functions and powers dealing with legislation, decrees, and appointment of public officials. Custom dictates that the President upon taking office renounce any party affiliation, so that he or she may be seen as neutral in regard to party politics. The President's powers were once so broad that it was said Finland was the only real monarchy in Northern Europe. However, amendments passed in 1999 reduced his powers somewhat, and the President now shares executive authority with the Prime Minister, ordering premature parliamentary elections. Upon the proposal of the Prime Minister, the President may, having consulted the parliamentary groups and while Parliament is in session, order the holding of premature parliamentary election. The new Parliament is chosen for a normal 4-year term. Parliament itself may decide when to end its session before the election day. From 1919 to 1991, the President's power to order a premature election was unqualified, and he could disallow when he considered it necessary. Presidents have ordered premature parliamentary elections on 7 occasions. The President declares each annual session of Parliament open and closes the last annual session. This is done in a speech at each opening and closing ceremony. Appointing and discharging ministers. The Prime Minister and other members of the government are appointed and discharged by the President, after parliamentary elections, or in any other situation where the government has resigned. The President, taking into account the result of consultations between the parliamentary groups and having heard the view of the Speaker, submits to Parliament his or her nominee for Prime Minister, if confirmed by Parliament with a majority of the votes cast. The President then proceeds to appoint the Prime Minister and other ministers designated by him or her. The President is constitutionally required to dismiss a government or any minister as soon as they have lost the confidence of Parliament. Appointing powers. The President appoints Governor and other members of the Board of the Bank of Finland, Chancellor of Justice and the Vice-Chancellor of Justice, Prosecutor General and the Vice Prosecutor General, ambassadors and heads of diplomatic missions abroad, Executive of Gala, Secretary General and presenters at office of the President of the Republic. Most of the appointment process is conducted at the respective ministry. The office of the President does not process preparations or presentations of the appointment. Nevertheless, presidents have used these powers publicly, even against the internal recommendation of the agency. In addition, the President appoints or gives commission to officers of the Finnish Defense Forces and the Finnish Border Guard, permanent judges, including presidents and members of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Administrative Court, presidents and members of the Courts of Appeal and Administrative Courts of Appeal. International relations. The President conducts Finland's foreign policy in cooperation with the Council of State. The provisions of treaties and other international obligations that affect domestic legislation are implemented by Acts of Parliament. Otherwise, international obligations are implemented by a presidential decree. Decisions on war and peace are taken by the President with the assent of Parliament. Legislation. The President must sign and approve all acts adopted by Parliament before they become law. He or she must decide on ratification within 3 months of receiving the act and may request an opinion from the Supreme Court of the Supreme Administrative Court before giving assent. Should the President refuse assent or fail to decide on the matter in time, Parliament reconsiders the act and can re-adopt it with a majority of votes cast. The act will then enter into force without ratification. If Parliament fails to re-adopt the act, it is deemed to have lapsed. Presidential vetoes are generally successful in preventing the bill becoming law. Presidential pardon. In single cases, the President has the power of pardon from any imprisonment, fine, or forfeiture. General pardon requires an act of Parliament. The power of pardon has effectively become the instrument to limit life imprisonments to 12 years or more, since successive presidents have eventually given pardon to all felons. The President, however, retains the power to deny pardon. In autumn 2006, the regular paroling of convicts serving a life sentence power was transferred to the Helsinki Court of Appeals, and the peculiar arrangement, where the President exercises judicial power, ended. The presidential power of giving pardon is, however, retained, although its use will diminish. Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Finnish Defense Forces, but may delegate this position to another Finnish citizen. Delegation of the position of Commander-in-Chief is an exception to the principle that the President cannot delegate functions to others. The last time this has occurred was in the Second World War. The President commissions officers and decides on the mobilization of the defense forces. If Parliament is not in session when a decision to mobilize is taken, it must be immediately convened. As Commander-in-Chief, the President has the power to issue military orders concerning general guidelines for military defense, significant changes in military preparedness and the principles according to which military defense is implemented. Decisions concerning military orders are made by the President in conjunction with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. The President decides on military appointments in conjunction with the Minister of Defense. Emergency powers. Under the Preparedness Act, in exceptional circumstances the President may issue a decree authorizing the government to exercise emergency powers for up to 1 year at a time. The decree must be submitted to Parliament for its approval. Should the powers available under the Preparedness Act prove inadequate in an emergency, additional powers can be assumed under the State of Defense Act. The President may declare a state of defense by decree for a maximum of 3 months initially. If necessary, it can be extended for a maximum of 1 year at a time. A state of defense may also be declared in a region of the country. The decree must be submitted to Parliament for approval. Decorations. The President, as Grand Master, awards decorations and medals belonging to the Order of the White Rose of Finland, the Order of the Lion of Finland and the Order of the Cross of Liberty to Finnish and foreign citizens. Likewise, titles of honor are awarded by the President. These include, for example, Professor and different councillor titles. These titles are symbolic, carry no responsibilities and have a similar role as knighting in monarchies. The highest titles of Alshnofos and Vuranofos. Speeches. The President makes the number of important public speeches and statements each year. The most notable of these are the annual New Year's speech on the 1st of January, and the speech at the opening of each annual session of Parliament. Compensation. The president receives an annual salary of €160,000. The salary and other benefits are exempt from all taxes. Presidents of Finland. Living former presidents. Official residences. The president has the use of 3 properties for residential and hospitality purposes: the Presidential Palace and Mantainiemi, both in Helsinki, and Kulturanta in Naantali on the west coast near Turku. Incapacity and succession. The President of Finland has no vice president. If the president is temporarily prevented from performing his or her duties, the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister becomes acting president until the president's incapacity ceases. If the president dies or if the government declares that the president is permanently unable to carry out his or her duties, a new president is elected as soon as possible. If the president, the Prime Minister, and the Deputy Prime Minister are all temporarily unavailable, the most senior minister of the government, in years of service, becomes the acting president. Impeachment. If the Chancellor of Justice, the Parliamentary Ombudsman of the Council of State deemed that the President of the Republic is guilty of treason or high treason, or a crime against humanity, the matter shall be communicated to the Parliament. If the Parliament, by 3/4 of the votes cast, decides that charges are to be brought, the Prosecutor General prosecutes the President in the High Court of Impeachment and the President abstains from office for the duration of the proceedings. Independence Day reception. The traditional Independence Day reception at the Presidential Palace on the 6th of December is one of the key annual events in the presidential calendar. It originated as a celebration of Finland's national independence and pride, and although nowadays it is seen by some as a glorified social party, the reception is broadcast every year on television and draws a large viewing audience. The number of guests invited has varied from about 1,600 to 2,000. With the exception of ambassadors, only Finns are invited. The history of the Independence Day reception stretches back to 1919, when the first afternoon reception was held at the Presidential Palace. In 1922, President and Mrs. Ståhlberg hosted the first evening reception at the Presidential Palace, with the reception beginning at 9:00. Guests included the government, diplomats, members of Parliament, high-ranking officers, senior civil servants, artists, and other prominent people. Music and dancing were on the program and the reception lasted until late night. Similar receptions have been held ever since, though less regularly in the beginning. Since 1946, the Independence Day reception has taken place at the Presidential Palace every year, with 5 exceptions. In 1952 it was cancelled on account of President Paasikivi's illness. In 1972 it was held at Finlandia Hall in connection with the Independence Day concert, with the Prime Minister as host, because the Presidential Palace was being renovated. In 1974 it was cancelled on account of the death of President Kekkonen's wife only a few days prior to the reception. In 1981 it was held at Finlandia Hall after the Independence Day concert, with Deputy Prime Minister Eno Uusitalo as host, because President Kekkonen had resigned in October and Deputy President Mauno Koivisto was campaigning for president. In 2013, the reception was held at the Tampere Hall in central Tampere, because the Presidential Palace in Helsinki was undergoing repairs at the time. This was the first time in the history of independent Finland that the reception was held outside Helsinki. The president and president's spouse greet the guests individually in the State Hall at the beginning of the evening. Later on there is dancing, with music provided by the Guards Band. There is also a traditional buffet history. After Finland's independence and the civil war in Finland, the matter of whether Finland should be a republic or a constitutional monarchy was much debated, and the outcome was a compromise. A rather monarchy-like, strong presidency with great powers over Finland's foreign affairs, the appointment of the Council of State and the officers of the civil service. The constitution was changed in 2000 to redistribute some of this power to the Parliament and the Council of State. The new constitution specifies how the principles of parliamentarism are to be followed. Most significantly, the president can no longer nominate the prime minister or individual ministers independently. For example, this power was previously used to form governments where the party in plurality was excluded. Regarding the right to dissolve parliament, consultation with the prime minister and heads of parliamentary groups was made mandatory before the parliament could be dissolved and new elections ordered. Furthermore, some appointing powers, such as appointment of provincial governors and department heads at ministries, were transferred to the Cabinet of Finland. Pre-Republican heads of state. For the date of Finland's independence on 6 December 1917 until the end of the Finnish Civil War in May 1918, Svanhavud was the head of state of White Finland in his capacity as chairman of the Senate. Between May 1918 and July 1919, Finland had two regents and, for a time, an elected king, although the latter renounced the throne. Svanhavud, Regent Prince Frederick Charles of Hesse, elected as King of Finland on 7 October 1918 but never took office and renounced the throne on 4 December after Germany's defeat in World War I. He had not time enough to arrive in Finland before the political climate changed following the end of the war. It is said that his regnal name was to be Vaino I of Finland, but due to the not being contemporary records of this name, it is widely considered a popular misbelief, probably created by columnist Vaino Nuortava. Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, Regent.